Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are attempting something a little dangerous. We're going to try and dismantle one of the most persistent stereotypes in the history of human thought. You know the one. It's this idea that there's a wall, a high, impenetrable wall between faith and reason.
The Great Divide. Yes. It's the defining binary of the modern world. You're either a person of facts or you are a person of belief.
Exactly. And usually when we talk about religious text, we assume we are stepping firmly onto the belief side of that wall. We assume we're being asked to suspend our critical faculties, to accept things that don't make logical sense because, well...
It's a mystery.
It's a mystery, but we are continuing our deep dive into Surah al-Baqarah today, specifically verses 4 and 5, and the sources we have in front of us are, they're screaming the exact opposite.
It is quite a pivot.
Yeah.
The argument here is that the ultimate goal of this particular system isn't faith in the way we usually define it, as, blind acceptance. The goal is scientific certainty.
Scientific certainty?
The text isn't asking you to close your eyes. It is asking you to open them, pull out a microscope, and look at the data of history.
Which sounds, frankly, contradictory to everything I've ever heard about religion. But before we get to the scientific certainty part, which is really the climax of today's verses, we have to do a little housekeeping.
Right.
We are jumping into verses 4 and 5, but we can't really understand them if we don't remember where we landed in verse 3. It's like trying to watch the sequel without seeing the original.
I'd say it's worse than that. It's like trying to drive a car without an engine. In our last deep dive, we analyzed verse 3, and we established that it builds the engine of this entire civilizational model.
Okay, so let's do a quick diagnostic check on that engine. Based on the sources, we defined 3 core components. First was Aman.
Right. And we established that Iman is not blind faith. Not at all. It is rational conviction. It is the state of mind you reach after you have processed the evidence.
So it's the conclusion.
It's a conclusion of a thought process, not the suspension of one.
Then we had Salah, which traditionally everyone translates as ritual prayer, but our sources took a sledgehammer to that limitation.
They did, yeah. They argued that while the ritual is the training ground, Salah, in the societal context, means the establishment of the system. It is a socio-political order where people gather to solve the problems of humanity.
So it's not just bowing in a room.
No, it's building a society that functions. It's active.
And finally, the concept of Kaib the unseen. We moved away from, ghosts and goblins and looked at it as the unseen consequences of universal laws.
Exactly. Gravity is unseen, but if I drop this pen, it falls. The law is invisible, but the effect is tangible. That is Kaib.
Okay, so that's the engine. Rational people with Eman, building a just system with Salah, and trusting in the invisible laws of cause and effect, the Kaib. Now, verse 3 built the car. Verses 4 and 5 are about to tell us where this car goes, how it navigates the timeline of history, and most importantly, what happens when we actually drive it. What does it produce?
We are moving from theory to harvest. And that is a crucial distinction. You can have the best theory in the world, but if it doesn't produce a crop, if it doesn't put food on the table and safety in the streets, it is... well, it's useless.
So let's crack open verse 4. It starts with a very specific description of these conscious people, the mutakin, it says, and those who have Iman in what was sent down to you and what was sent down before you.
Right.
Now, I have to be honest, when I first read that, my eyes kind of glazed over. It sounds like standard theological boilerplate. Believe in the book and believe in the old books. But looking at the notes here, the sources are digging into something much, much deeper. They are talking about the architecture of knowledge itself.
They are. They're distinguishing between 2 fundamental types of knowledge. This is what we could call the source code discussion. The verse uses the phrase, ma unzil ilayka, what was sent down to you.
Sent down.
The sources emphasize that directionality. It is coming from the outside in.
Okay, let's pull on that thread, outside in. Because, we have a lot of brilliant people in human history. We have Plato, we have Shakespeare, we have Einstein. They came up with incredible things. They felt inspired. Poets talk about the muse all the time. Are the sources saying that isn't valid?
They aren't saying it's not valid genius. Of course not. They are saying it is not revelation. Think about the geography of the mind for a second. When Shakespeare writes a sonnet, or when a philosopher comes up with a theory of ethics, where does that information originate?
Well, it comes from their brain, from their observation of the world, their experiences.
Exactly. It bubbles up from within the human consciousness. It is processed through their specific cultural lens, their emotional state, their trauma, their joy. It is inside out.
Okay.
It starts in the human experience and projects outward. It might be brilliant, but it is inherently subjective. It is limited by the data set of that one human being.
So Einstein is limited by being Einstein. He can't see outside his own bubble of perception, as vast as it might be.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with the claim of wahi, or revelation. The sources argue that this is outside in. It is objective data transmitted from a source that is completely external to the human system.
Like a download, a data packet.
That's a great analogy. It's like a data packet from a server that isn't on our local network. And this brings us to a point the sources are absolutely obsessive about: the personality of the prophet.
Ah, okay.
You'll notice that in secular history, we often analyze religious leaders as great men. We say, oh, Muhammad was a brooding genius who meditated in a cave until he realized the unity of God.
Right, the genius philosopher theory, that he sort of figured it all out.
The sources reject that entirely. They argue that if the Quran was the result of the prophet's deep thoughts or his meditation, it would still be subjective. It would be inside out.
It would be his opinion, a very good opinion, maybe, but still his.
It would be colored by his fears, his desires, his time period. It would have noise in the signal.
Okay, I see.
Exactly. But the claim here is that the prophet had no interference in the content. He wasn't the composer. He was the antenna. He was a receiver for a transmission that he didn't write, didn't edit, and frankly, the sources say, sometimes didn't initially understand himself.
That is a massive distinction, a game-changing one, really. Because if it's just philosophy, I can debate it. I can say, well, I respect Socrates, but I think he missed a spot here. But if the claim is that this is objective data from the architect of the system...
And you can't debate it on the grounds of opinion. You can only test it on the grounds of results. Is the data accurate? Does the code run? Does it produce the promised outcome?
This leads to a really interesting and frankly kind of controversial point in the notes regarding the end of an era. We've all heard the phrase finality of prophethood. Usually it's presented as a dogma, no more prophets, end of story.
A rule to be followed.
Right. But the sources explain why, from a developmental perspective. They call it the maturity of humanity.
This is a beautiful concept. I mean, think about child development. When a child is a toddler, how do you parent them?
You hold their hand constantly. You don't let them cross the street alone. You give them direct, constant commands. Don't touch that. Eat this. Go there.
Right. You are the external guide. The child cannot rely on their own intellect yet because it isn't fully developed. The sources argue that the era of prophecy from Adam through the thousands of prophets down to Muhammad was the childhood of the human race.
So humanity needed constant, direct, outside intervention.
Yes. Here is a prophet to hold your hand. Here is another one. It was intensive, hands-on guidance.
But children grow up.
They do. And eventually, you hand the child the car keys. You say, look, I've taught you the rules. You have the manual in the glove compartment. You have a brain. Go drive.
So the finality of prophethood isn't God abandoning humanity.
Not at all. It is God declaring that humanity has graduated. The method of receiving direct, objective knowledge from the outside has ended because the manual, the Quran, is complete and preserved.
So we are the adults in the room now. We have the book, and we have our intellect. Those are the tools.
Exactly. And this is why the sources are so critical of modern mysticism.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because you have people today, and I'm not just talking about fringe cults, but even mainstream spiritual circles, who claim cash illumination or ilham, inspiration. They say, I meditated and God told me to do this, or I received a sign from the heavens. It's very common.
It is, and the sources take a very hard line on this, a very logical line. They argue that if you claim God is speaking to you directly, giving you binding information or commands for other people, you are essentially claiming to be a prophet. You're cloning the channel is still open.
You're claiming the data packet is still downloading just for you.
Right, and the system says, no, the download is complete. The server connection for Wahi is closed. If you have a feeling, that's your subjective emotion. It's an inside-out phenomenon. It has no authority over anyone else.
That's actually a very democratic, anti-hierarchical stance when you think about it.
It's profoundly so.
Well, imagine if I came to you and said, you have to give me your money because God spoke to me last night and said so.
I'd tell you to get lost. Or I'd ask for some pretty spectacular proof.
But if the channel is still open, you can't really disprove me. Maybe he did speak to me. It creates a hierarchy of special people who have a hotline to the divine.
Which is the basis of every priesthood, every cult.
Right. But the Quranic system smashes that. It says, there are no special people. The only authority is this objective text that sits on the table between us. We both have equal access to it. You don't need a guru. You need to read and think.
It effectively bans the priesthood. It protects the system from charlatans who claim privileged access. It creates a society of law rather than a society of personalities.
I love that. Okay, moving to the second part of verse 4. It says to have iman in what was sent down before you. Wa ma unzila min qablika.
The historical thread.
This brings us to the historical thread. The sources use this phrase I find fascinating, the unity of deen.
This is absolutely vital for understanding the Quran's worldview. The sources argue that there has only ever been one religion or deen in the history of humanity.
Wait, hold on. One religion. Because I look at a history book and I see Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism. I see a lot of different deens.
But the sources distinguish between deen and sharia. Deen refers to the core principles, the operating system.
The OS, okay.
The unity of the creator, the accountability of man, the law of these fundamental truths. From Noah to Abraham to Moses to Jesus to Muhammad, this OS was identical.
Because truth doesn't change.
Exactly. Gravity was gravity in the time of Moses, and it is gravity today. The fundamental laws are constant.
Okay, so the OS is the same, but the interface is different. The apps are different.
That is the Sharia, the bylaws, the specific rituals, the dietary codes, the legal punishments. Those changed to fit the evolutionary stage of society.
So they were context dependent.
Entirely. In the time of Moses, society was tribal and rough, so the Sharia was strict, direct, and tailored to that environment. By the time of Jesus, the emphasis shifted to internal purification. By the time of the Quran, humanity was ready for the final, universal set of bylaws that could apply to a global civilization.
So believing in what was sent down before isn't about following the laws of Moses today. It's about acknowledging that Moses was running the same OS, just an earlier version suitable for his hardware.
That's a perfect way to put it. It creates a continuity of history. We aren't a new cult that popped up in the desert. We are the final chapter of a book that started with the first human. It honors the entire human prophetic experience.
But we have to address the elephant in the room. And this is a big one. If I go to a bookstore right now, I can buy a Bible. I can buy a Torah. The verse says, believe in what was sent down before. But we know, and the Quran itself points out, that there are contradictions between these books and the Quran. So how does that work? Do I believe in them or do I correct them?
The sources are very nuanced here, and it's a critical point. We respect the original revelation given to Moses and Jesus. We believe that was wahi, objective truth.
The original file.
The original uncorrupted file.
Yeah.
However, the sources argue that the physical books existing today, the bound volumes we call the Torah or the Gospels, are not those original unadulterated transmissions.
They are the director's cut with commentary.
Worse, they are historical remnants. They are mixtures of the original word blended with human biography, history, translation errors, and political edits over centuries. They are corrupted files, to use our tech analogy.
So what is the Quran's role in this library? Is it just another book on the shelf?
No, the sources describe the Quran as the muhaimin. That word is powerful. It translates to the guardian or the master standard.
The answer key.
Think of it exactly as the answer key. The Quran validates the truths that remain in the previous books. Yes, that part is true. That aligns with the original OS, and it corrects the human edits. No, Jesus did not say that. The church added that 300 years later.
Yeah. So it filters the signal from the noise in the previous scriptures. It's like a final protected master edition.
Correct. And this brings us to one of the biggest controversies we need to tackle today. The concept of nask, or abrogation.
Oh, boy.
The cancellation theory.
Yes. This is a minefield for many people.
Let me set the stage for the listeners who might not be theology nerds. There is a mainstream idea in classical Islamic scholarship that some verses in the Quran cancel out other verses in the Quran.
Right.
For example, you have early verses revealed in Mecca that say, speak nicely to people. Then you have later verses revealed in Medina that say, fight the oppressors. The theory of abrogation says, the fight verse canceled the nice verse, the old policy is gone.
That is the traditional view.
Hate is a strong word. It's the right word in this context. They refute it aggressively. Their argument is this. If you believe in internal abrogation, that verse A in the Quran cancels verse B, you are insulting the author.
How so? What's the logic there?
Think about it. If I write a manual for a complex machine, and on page 50 I say turn the knob left, and on page 100 I say, actually, forget what I said on page 50, turn it right. What does that tell you about me as an author?
It tells me you didn't plan very well, or you changed your mind halfway through. It's not a perfect manual.
Exactly. It implies a lack of foresight. It implies that the author is reacting to events rather than orchestrating them. The sources argue that the Quran is a complete, consistent divine document. God doesn't change his mind.
So the apparent contradictions aren't contradictions at all.
They're a failure of our understanding of the context. If two verses seem to clash, it's not because one is canceled. It's because we are failing to see that they apply to different situations.
So using my example, speak nicely isn't canceled by fight. They are just different tools for different situations.
Precisely. You speak nicely when you are debating ideas with reasonable people. You fight when you are being physically attacked and your community's survival is at stake.
Right.
Both laws stand. Neither is abrogated. You just have to be wise enough to know which tool to pull out of the toolbox for the job at hand.
But wait, the word abrogation, Nash, is literally in the Quran. It says we do not abrogate a verse. So something is being abrogated.
Right.
If it's not internal, what is it?
The sources clarify this beautifully. They argue Nask refers to two things, and neither is internal contradiction. One, the Quran abrogating the bylaws of previous scriptures. The law of the Quran replaces the law of Moses. That era is over. That version of the software is deprecated.
Okay, that makes sense.
Two, it refers to the replacement of temporary interim commands that were given during the 23-year revelation period itself, like a doctor weaning a patient off a drug. There might be a temporary instruction for a specific battle or situation, but once the revelation was completed and the prophet died, the book was sealed. No verse inside that final bound book cancels another.
I found the history of this in the notes fascinating. It seems like the scholars themselves have been slowly realizing this over centuries. It's not a new idea.
It is a great example of the maturity we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
In the early centuries, some commentators, in their enthusiasm, claim there were 500 abrogated verses.
500? That's like a tenth of the book.
It's massive. It basically rendered the text a minefield. You never knew if the verse you were reading was valid or void. It created total uncertainty.
So what happened?
Well, as scholars thought deeper, that number dropped. It went down to 100, then 20. Eventually, Shah Waliullah, one of the giant intellects of modern Islamic history, looked at those remaining 20 and said, wait a minute, I can explain almost all of these without resorting to abrogation. He narrowed it down to 5.
5. From 500 to 5. That's a huge shift.
And his student, Ubaydullah Nasindi, went even further and said, even for these 5, there is a contextual explanation. There is no cancellation. So the trajectory of deep, rational study points to zero internal contradictions.
That is a huge relief. Because if the book contradicts itself, the whole scientific certainty thing falls apart before it even begins. You can't have a scientific theory that says gravity pulls down and gravity pushes up at the same time.
Exactly. Consistency is the prerequisite for certainty.
Okay, let's pivot. We've established the source code, which is revelation, and the history. Now, verse 4 ends with a look forward. And of the akhirat, they are certain. Now, I know akhirat. Every Muslim knows this word. It means the hereafter, life after death, heaven and hell, end of story. But looking at these sources, they are doing something radical with this word.
They are broadening it significantly. They are reclaiming its linguistic root. Akhirat comes from the word akhir, which simply means the end or what comes after or the future.
So it's not just a post-death destination.
No. In these sources, Akhirat isn't just a spooky realm you go to when you die. It is a comprehensive concept of the future. And they break it down into 3 distinct overlapping layers.
Okay, let's peel these layers back. Layer 1 is what they call the sociological akhirat, the future of nations.
This is a powerful economic and political warning. The sources contrast Akhirat, the future, with another Quranic term, ashila, the immediate.
Immediate gratification.
Exactly. The tragic flaw of most human societies and most individuals is short-termism. We are obsessed with the ashila. Immediate profit, immediate pleasure, immediate poll numbers.
Eating the seed corn.
That is the perfect metaphor from the sources. If a nation focuses only on today, consuming its resources, ignoring infrastructure, letting education rot because it's too expensive right now, it is destroying its akhirat. It is killing its own future.
And the mutakin.
The mutakin, the conscious ones, are defined as those who are willing to sacrifice the ashila, the now, to secure the akhirat, the future. They plant the seed corn instead of eating it.
That's not just theology. That's sustainability. That's climate change policy. That's national debt management.
It is. A God-conscious nation, in this definition, is a nation that plans 50 years ahead, not 5 minutes ahead. It's about long-term civilizational survival.
Okay, layer 2. The mechanism that connects the present to the future. The law of requital. We touched on this in the intro, the unseen law, but let's go deeper. The sources call this the central nervous system of the Quranic worldview.
It's everything. The law of requital is the absolute conviction that every action has a reaction. But we aren't just talking about physics, we are talking about morality and sociology.
So karma.
It's similar, but the sources frame it as something much more mechanical, less mystical. The sources have this chilling line. You can escape the police. You can cross a border to escape a jurisdiction, but you cannot escape the law of requital.
That's the part that keeps you up at night.
It should.
Yeah.
In a secular materialist system, justice is external. It depends on getting caught. If I steal $1 million and I have a good lawyer, or I bribe the judge, or I just hide the money, well, I win. I beat the system. I got free money. In the Quranic system, there is no beating the system. The theft itself is the punishment.
Wait, explain that. The theft is the punishment. How?
Because the act of stealing, of injustice, imprints on yourself. It degrades your personality. It weakens your ability to trust and be trusted. It rewires your brain towards parasitism. And on a societal level, it introduces a virus of corruption that will eventually come back to bite you. The society you helped corrupt will one day corrupt you or your children.
It's baked into the action.
The law of requital says that the consequences of an action are built into the action, like a seed containing the tree. You can't plant a cactus and get a rose. You can't plant injustice and harvest peace. It's impossible.
It's like touching a hot stove. You don't need a policeman to write you a ticket for touching it. The burn is the immediate, inescapable consequence built into the act.
That's a perfect analogy. Akirat is simply the realization that the stove is hot, even if the blister doesn't show up for another hour or another year or another generation. True security in a society comes when people believe this. You don't need a camera on every corner if every citizen believes that their actions are being recorded on the immutable hard drive of the universe.
Okay. And then we get to layer 3, the one we are most familiar with. Evolutionary akhirat, life after death. But even here, the sources twist the narrative. They don't talk about it as some magical, disconnected event. They call it Khalqi Jadid, a new creation.
This aligns with the rationalist approach we've been seeing. They view life as a continuous evolutionary chain. Look at the history of life on Earth. We started as dead matter, and life emerged plants, then movement and consciousness animals, then self-awareness humans.
Right, a clear progression.
The sources argue, why would evolution stop here? Is a hairless ape with a smartphone the absolute pinnacle of existence?
I certainly hope not. We've got problems.
The argument is that the human self, or ego, that conscious I that is listening to this right now, is a developed entity. And death isn't the end of that entity. It is the birth canal into the next stage of its evolution.
I like that, the birth canal.
The sources use a powerful analogy. A baby develops eyes in the womb. It has no use for them in the dark, fluid-filled womb. It develops them because it will need them in the world it is about to enter.
So our actions in this world are developing senses for the next one.
Exactly. We are developing ourself in this world for the next stage. If a baby decides, I don't want to develop lungs, I'm comfortable here in the fluid, it was born stillborn or severely handicapped. So the sources are saying, if you don't develop yourself here through moral action, through seeking knowledge, through building justice, you enter the Akarat handicap.
You fail the evolutionary leap.
You fail the leap. So hell isn't a torture chamber designed by an angry deity. It is the natural consequence of stunted evolution. It is the internal pain of a failed self that is not equipped for the next stage of reality. And heaven is the joy of a developed self moving into a higher plane of existence, using the faculties it built in this life. It brings the responsibility right back to us. You are building your afterlife brick by brick, choice by choice, right now.
This brings us to section 4, and this is where the rubber meets the road. We have the theory. We have the definition of the future. Now, verse 4 says, and of the Akarat they are certain. The Arabic is yuqinun. It doesn't say they believe. It doesn't use the word uman. It uses the word for certainty. The sources distinguish between iman, belief, and yaqin, certainty. What is the difference?
Iman is the hypothesis. Yaqin is the verified theory. The sources compare this directly to scientific certainty. How does a scientist get certainty? He doesn't just believe a theory is true. He runs the experiment. He looks at the data. He sees the results. Yaqin is the state of conviction a scientist has after an experiment is proven, replicated, and verified.
But how? How do you get that level of certainty about the future? I can't run an experiment on the afterlife and come back with a lab report.
No, but you can observe the law of requital in history. This is the crux of the argument. The sources say, look at the rise and fall of nations. Look at the data points of history as your laboratory.
So history is the data set.
It's the data set. Every time a nation built its economy on exploitation like Pharaoh's Egypt, what happened? It collapsed. Every time a nation established justice and cared for the weak, what happened? It thrived, at least for a time. When you see that pattern repeat 1,000 times in 1,000 different contexts, you stop believing it as a nice idea. You become certain of it as an unbreakable law of social physics.
It's like the sun rising. I don't believe the sun will rise tomorrow. I have yakin, I have certainty, because I've seen the pattern of physics my entire life.
Exactly. And this leads perfectly into verse 5, the climax, the result. Those are on guidance from their Lord, and those are the muflihun.
The mufli.
We usually translate muflihun as the successful ones, but the root word falah is agricultural. It comes from the verb to plow or to farm.
I want to stick with this farming image for a minute because I think we skip over it too fast. We hear cultivation and we think, okay, nice nature metaphor, but put yourself in the shoes of a subsistence farmer 2,000 years ago, or even in many parts of the world today.
It's a life or death calculation.
Right. You have a sack of corn. That corn isn't just a snack. It is money. It is food. It is safety. You can grind it up today, bake bread, and your family goes to sleep with full bellies. You are safe today.
That is the ashila, the immediate gratification we talked about.
But the muflihun, the successful farmer, does something that looks borderline insane to a shallow observer. He takes that safety, that food, that wealth, and he throws it in the dirt. He literally buries his wealth.
He engages in a calculated loss for a future gain.
It's terrifying. If that rain doesn't come, if there's a blight, he starves. His kids starve. So when the Quran says these people have yaqeen certainty, it's not a casual philosophical word. You have to be absolutely 100% scientifically certain that the laws of nature work, or you would never throw your only food into the ground.
That is the perfect bridge to the economic argument. Because in the Quranic system, the soil isn't dirt, it's society. And the seed isn't corn, it's your capital, your wealth, your energy.
So the insane act is writing that check for a zakat or infaq.
It's taking your hard-earned surplus, which you could use to buy a bigger house or a nicer car right now, and burying it in the community, investing it in the poor, in education, in infrastructure, in the system.
To the capitalist materialist, that looks like a loss on the balance sheet. I had $100, gave away $10, now I have $90. I lost. Simple math.
But the farmer, the muslihun, knows the hidden law. He has yakin. He knows that a society where wealth circulates is a fertile field. He knows that if he buries that wealth in the community, the harvest in terms of safety, reduced crime, a better economy for everyone, social stability, will return 700-fold. He isn't being nice. He's being smart. He is investing in the akhirat, the future of his community.
This connects directly back to the story of Prophet Shu'aib. I saw this in the notes and it blew my mind. We usually think people reject prophets because they don't want to change their theology. You know, I like my stone god, leave me alone.
Right, a purely religious dispute.
But the story of Shu'aib is purely economic.
It is. Prophet Shu'aib went to the Midianites. They were a trading nation, very wealthy but very corrupt. They cheated the weights and measures, they hoarded wealth, and the Quran records them saying something incredible to Shu'aib. They say, "Does your Salah command you that we cannot do what we want with our wealth?"
That is the smoking gun. It's not about prayer.
It is. They didn't mind him praying in a corner. Go do your rituals, Shu'aib. We don't care.
Yeah.
They hated his Salah, his system, because it was an economic intervention.
It messed with their money.
It interfered with their freedom to exploit. It challenged their laissez-faire capitalism.
Yeah.
It demanded economic justice.
Challenged the pharaonic system.
Yes. The sources contrast two fundamental economic models throughout the Quran. The system of Pharaoh is one works, another eats. That is exploitation. The slave builds the pyramid, the Pharaoh lives in it. Simple.
And the other system?
The system of the Quran is return for labor. Laysa lilin insani illa masa. For the human being is nothing but that for which he strives. Every soul is recompensed for what it earns. This is why Salah creates falah, success. It creates an economy where effort matches reward and where the surplus is reinvested in the soil, which is the society itself.
This brings us to the grand synthesis in Section 5, the third way. We live in a world of binaries. You have the secular materialists on one side. They want the dunya, the world. Get rich or die trying. Then you have the religious monastics on the other. They reject a world. Money is evil. This world is a prison. Suffer now. Get pie in the sky when you die. The sources say, both of you are profoundly wrong.
Both are failed strategies, according to this worldview. If you focus only on dunya, on materialism, you might get rich today. But you destroy the future, the akhirat. You eat the seed corn. Civilization collapses from greed and inequality.
Okay.
But, and this is the controversial part for many religious people, if you focus only on spirituality and ignore the world, you end up in misery, poverty, and humiliation. You become weak and dependent.
And the sources have a very provocative take on that poverty. I need you to clarify this because it sounds harsh. The sources argue that worldly humiliation, poverty, and dependence are forms of divine punishment. Now, if I'm a poor person or I live in a struggling nation, that feels like victim blaming. Oh, you're poor. God must hate you.
It's not about hating the individual at all. It's about diagnosing the system. The argument is based on the unshakable law of requital. If the Quranic system claims to produce falah success, a bountiful harvest, if it claims to be the best way to organize society, then following that system must produce results. It's a scientific claim. If I have a farming manual that says, do X and you will get corn, and I do X and I get weeds, either the manual is wrong or I didn't actually do X.
Oh, okay, I see. So if a nation that calls itself Muslim is poor, dependent on foreign aid, scientifically backward, and politically weak, they can't turn around and say, we are the beloved of God. He is just testing us with suffering.
The sources say, no. Your condition is the data. It's the result of your experiment. It is proof that you have abandoned the system. You have abandoned the law of requital. You might be performing rituals, but you are not running the system of justice and knowledge. If you were, you would be thriving. So poverty isn't a badge of piety in this context. It is a sign of systemic failure.
Wow. That flips the whole pious poverty narrative on its head. It's a call to action, not a justification for misery.
Completely. And so the Quran offers the third way. It's in a famous prayer. Our Lord, give us hasana, beauty and goodness in the world, and hasana, beauty and goodness in the future.
Not one or the other, both.
Both. True success is integrated. It starts with economic justice, scientific progress, and stability here. And that momentum, that developed self, carries you into the evolutionary stages of the hereafter.
It's a seamless transition. You build the kingdom of God on earth, and that qualifies you for the kingdom of God in the next stage. You don't get one by abandoning the other.
Exactly. You don't jump tracks. You don't go from a hellish society to a heavenly afterlife. You evolve from one stage of beauty to a higher stage of beauty.
So let's bring this all home. We've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the engine in verse 3. Rational conviction, a just system, and belief in cause and effect. Now, in verses 4 and 5, we see the fuel and the destination. The fuel is objective revelation, wahi, and the data of history. The destination is the akhirat, secure future for our nation and our own personal evolution. And the method is the farmer.
That is the image I want the listener to take away. The farmer. That is the ideal human being in this paradigm. Being religious in this deep dive isn't about withdrawing from the world to pray in a cave.
No.
It is about being a courageous, intelligent farmer. You take your seed, your wealth, your life, your intellect, your energy, you plant it in the soil, which is the system of justice, the Salah. You trust the law of requital, and you work tirelessly for the harvest, a thriving society where everyone has what they need to flourish. That is Falah.
And the final provocative thought from the sources for everyone to take with them. If we look around at our societies today, or even our own lives, and the harvest is rotten, if we see poverty, injustice, anxiety, decay, we need to stop looking at the sky and asking, why is God doing this to us?
The law of requital is perfect. The soil is neutral.
If the harvest is rotten, we need to check the seed. What are the beliefs we're actually planting?
Check the seed.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time as we continue to decode the architecture of al-Baqarah.